So, hi, I'm Tom. I'm a front-end developer and project lead for PWA at trivago, as mentioned. I am the last speaker today. I just want to say before I start, how did we feel? How do we feel? Good conference? Yeah? Great. So, I'm going to tell you the story of how trivago killed the dinosaurs. Again. So, it starts with a stock image of trivago. It begins in 2015, and in 2015, I was on Twitter, because that's how I roll. And a word kept popping up in my feed, and that word was service worker. And I kept seeing this word, and I was like, huh, okay. The more I saw it, the more I noticed that Google had just implemented a draft version of service worker in Google Chrome. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. Yeah, let's find out more. So I did something that normally I don't do. I read the spec. I read the W3 spec. Typically, if you can find a developer that reads specs, I'll be surprised. Anyway, I read the spec. 2 weeks later, it was announced that at trivago we would have an internal hackathon. So I was excited. I thought, I heard that you can do some offline things with Service Worker, so I'll try it out. And I spoke to one of my colleagues. He also happens to be named Tom, so we formed a band, and we decided to create a project together, which we would explore Service Worker and see what it could do. So we did. And we built a fake trivago. I say fake trivago because essentially we delivered an offline page, which, well, for technical problems and time-wise, we couldn't build it into the actual site. Also, we didn't have HTTPS, so we also couldn't do it for that reason. But we did that, and we delivered an offline page which actually used the same offline logo as our native app was doing at the same time. But we did that, and we realized we can't actually use this. We can't put it in the actual site because there was no way for us to actually get any information about what users did offline. As a business, I can't see, okay, well, I have one guy offline, or I have 1 million guys offline. We didn't know. So we're like, okay, well, maybe we can't do much with it. Some time later, actually 4 months later, I went to a place quite like this, a conference. Specifically, okay, this is a photo from last year as well. So, specifically, I went to RenderConf 2016 in Oxford, in England. And everyone took their seats, and the first speaker came up on stage. Familiar face to me. His name is Bruce Lawson. He was then the deputy CTO of Opera. And as he was talking, he kept saying this 3-word name. And that 3-word name was the term progressive web apps. Now, I've noticed before, a large portion of you know what progressive web apps are. So I don't really have to tell you about that. He kept mentioning all of these new APIs that were coming in. And all of these new APIs that, as Eva mentioned, were originally from native, but were now available on web, at the home screen being one of them. It's 2 years later, and I still get excited by the fact that you can add a website to your home screen. I don't know, I think that's amazing. The following day, another PWA-related talk happened. And it was from a speaker who I think some people in this audience might know, considering we're at Google. That speaker was Jake Archibald. And he started talking about Service Worker, and he started saying, oh yeah, this is how it works, and you can do this, you can do offline stuff with it. And I was like, cool, but sadly not usable, because there's no way I can get any data. But then he said, introducing background sync, the ability to get data back up to the server once you come back online. I got pretty excited. In fact, I got excited that I wanted to run around the room and scream, it's provable! Offline is provable. We can prove it. But I didn't do that. I pulled out my laptop and wrote an investigation ticket into the impact it has on user experience. So following that, I went back to trivago, and I thought, this is really cool. And I went to a stand-up. Went to that stand-up, and a product manager, he said, so we were going to implement HTTPS. Our team requested we were going to do it, but they withdrew that request, so we're not going to do it now. So I said, well, I like PWA things. Can we still have it? And he was like, sure, yeah, we can do that. We thought the SEO benefits, there are SEO benefits involved. That was the PWA benefit, potentially. And there was also the fact that, well, it was 2016, and we didn't have HTTPS. What? So the development team got to work. They started making the links canonical. They started investigating how we can do this. And I thought it was super easy, because I did it on my own side, and it was done pretty quickly. So I said to the sysadmin at trivago, I said, let's just turn it on. Let's just do it. And he responded with, well, it's not quite that easy. And well, he was right in the end. We did a staggered release. We turned on trivago Poland first. After that, we turned on Netherlands, France, Russia, Turkey, and India. The idea of this was we can see how HTTPS has scaled. We had new servers, we had new architecture to deal with this. And later on, we rolled it out across 55 platforms. Now I said, can you turn it on at the start? And he said, it's not quite that easy. It took us 6 months. So no, it wasn't easy. But we also had some concerns, not just with the technical impacts, but SEO impacts as well. We thought, well, is Google really going to re-index all of our stuff? Well, we found out. Yes, they were. And actually, we saw slightly positive impacts on our SEO, which is something Google claimed, which I'm very happy that was provable. We also did something else, because we also were worried that HTTPS, there's a lot of work in the background of HTTPS, and it could slow your website down. So we did something else. We implemented or turned on HTTP2, and we noticed that once we did that, the performance was way better. Okay, maybe not way better, but it was good. So that was good. We were not complaining. HTTPS was great. We're like, this is great. Let's do other things with it. So we tried to. That project ended up coming to a close. We had HTTPS. We could leverage some new cool web APIs. So I went back to that ticket, that investigation ticket that I wrote in that conference. And I thought, well, we need to create a baseline. As Eva mentioned earlier, service worker was the baseline. We needed to implement the service worker. So we focused naturally on offline, or we focused on controlling the network. So I looked around at native, what were they doing? I looked around at some other PWAs at the time, and we come together, we build a little team, designer, product owner, and we decided to conceptualize something. So the goal was to kill the Google Chrome dinosaur. That's the realization that we had. That was the key intention here. So it was perhaps natural that we came up with a project name, which kind of gave that Project Meteorite. We killed the dinosaur, you see? You're probably thinking, Tom, it's quite a task. Killing that Google Chrome dinosaur is a big deal. Is it bigger than the HTTPS project? No. No, it took 5 people, basically. It took 2 front-end developers. It took 1 QA. It took 1 designer, and it took a project lead who did some development. But actually, this process was really great because we learned a lot. We learned a lot about design and how product development, and especially stuff that is coming straight into the industry. So this was a very new thing at the time. We were like, OK, let's learn a lot of things. So we learned that coupling design with development was absolutely crucial. The developer and the designer practically sat next to each other. And I say practically because it was more like a relay race. If the designer wasn't at the developer's desk, the developer was at the designer's desk. I then asked the designer, I was like, can you give me some learnings of your own? And she said, PWA is largely uncharted territory in design and a real opportunity for us as creative problem solvers to stretch ourselves to define a new standard. I would encourage all designers to embrace that challenge. What she really meant here was that all of these APIs that were coming to the web, they were originally kind of founded in native. That means they were originally just mobile. They were designed for mobile. And now these APIs were available on desktop. But those design patterns were totally different for desktop. Now, you saw that hamburger menu went from mobile, and now you sometimes see it on desktop. But that reeks of take that here and put it here. We're not going to change it despite the user audience. And then I asked Laura, is there any other challenges that you see? And she said, yeah, you have to drink all the tea the developers make you. It's really hard work. She was kind of right. It was Yorkshire tea. It was a box of 240 bags. And I mean, I'm not going to drink it on my own. I'm not a monster, you know. Nonetheless, getting input from design and tech was extremely valuable. Not just for the final outcome, but for the understanding of everyone. Everyone inside product, every designer, every developer, every quality assurance person, every manager. Ultimately, in the end, we had an interactive prototype which contained not only our offline experience, but also contained at the home screen. So we separated it into two. The first one was lost connection, meaning I'm in a subway and my connection is intermittent. It drops, sometimes comes in, sometimes goes out. That's annoying. I don't want to have to see the Google Chrome dinosaur every 3 seconds. I can play the game though. So we were designing this basically for use when your connection is horrible. The second one was when you're already offline. Now, I used this photo of the plane, and I'm really, really hoping that within the next couple of years, I don't have to use this photo again, and that actually we get Wi-Fi in planes. That'd be really great. But for the point where you don't have internet connection, then yeah. This was one part where I had lost my connection. Am I in the way? Yes. So the goal here was that we were informing the user that they're actually offline. So you'll see, you are offline. And then we tell them that they can reconnect. And they can press that button if they like, until they reconnect. And we also disable some of the stuff which is dynamic. So the content on the website which you really do need the server for, we just disable that interaction. So you know you can do that, but actually you can't do that. When they try to interact with content which we may or may not have, in this case, I don't have that data. If I did have it, then actually we would show content here, even though you're offline, depending on if it's pre-cached or not. In this case, we just gave them a really nice looking icon and said, hi, no, you're still offline. I know it says it at the bottom, but you're still offline. The next one was what happens when you go to trivago and you want to go to one of our partners, but you don't have an internet connection. Well, we gave you this little holding page, and you would go here, and you'd be like, OK, I'm still offline. But when your connection returns, it would actually forward you to the partner. So if you wanted to go to Expedia, or you wanted to go to Booking, then it would send you to that when your internet connection has come back. And then there's the final one, the offline page. We added a little game here. Now, a fun fact of this game is this actually originally was just a drawing. It was just a GIF image. And we were building this page. It was nicely designed and looked nice. And then an engineer came up to me one day. He said, Tom, I've got something you might want to see. I said, OK. It's a game? It's a game. Let's play. Oh, yeah. I must have spent a few minutes on that game, I have to say. It was fun. And I was like, we're going to add it to the real thing. Let's just add it. So we made some usability improvements. We made sure that everyone knew actually how to play the game. On the phone, you can tilt it. On the desktop, you can use your keys, arrow keys, sorry. And we also added a little surprise. If you know what a Konami code is, go to this maze, type in the Konami code, and then tell me if you can beat your friends in terms of how fast you complete it. It wins the game. 2 months later, we released it. And thanks to that background sync, we were actually able to capture some data. We actually had data about how many people went offline. Now, for a company like trivago, where we think people might actually be going offline whilst they're traveling, it would make sense to capture that data, no? Since then, we've tested more. We've tested device memory detection API, credentials API, network type and speed. As I mentioned yesterday, we have the one-tap sign-in, hence the credentials API. And we've also tested push notifications, geolocation, permission. But we noticed something, or we came to some kind of conclusion. And it was that these APIs, we see a lot about these APIs and what they're able to do. But we came to a conclusion that these APIs are building blocks. They're building materials to improve your user experience. They were brought to web to bring better integration with your device. That's fundamentally why these APIs are here. They're actually here to make us feel more fluid in our device. People say, I like native apps because it's fluid. It's actually the integration with native and the OS that it's actually the thing you really like, typically. And then we had them on web. Why don't you use them anymore then? There's some APIs there which I listed which actually we don't use anymore. Well, there's a reason for that. Building site. Building materials, specifically. I mentioned building materials earlier. These APIs are building materials. They are the wood, the bricks, the metal. Those APIs are those materials. If you throw all of those materials in a big pile, well, I'd say that that's a pretty bad user experience. It's not giving you much value. If you do something else with those materials, if you design them in a certain way, let's say you're building a hotel, trivago, then you think that it might actually bring you some value. You've now got a user experience that you've used those building blocks, you've designed it in a way that actually it's providing you some value. So then, you've created an experience that those users like, and because they like it, they're probably going to come back. They're going to use it again. So it's important to remember that it's not usually because of the building blocks themselves, of them being bad in any way, but it's the way that we package them together. So the way we utilize them is basically core here. The technology empowers us to create better user experience. And those APIs that we no longer use are no longer in use simply because they weren't wrapped in the best user experience that we think we could have done. It's not because they didn't bring technological value. But we learn and we try again. But I take that metaphor one step further. When we talk about designing the hotel here, we have to remember also that we also have to wrap it inside of personalization and making sure that your users are individual. You have to remember that your users are individual. Making that user experience inclusive yet personal is a large challenge. That's a lot to get right. But for those APIs that we still use, we saw increased engagement. And what did that lead to? Well, that led to better business metrics. We noticed that improved user experience led to better business metrics. And I like this slide. I might say it again. Improved user experience led to better business metrics. Yeah! So user experience is now something that we're trying to focus on. Building a product that gives you, the user value and finding ways that we can use these APIs leveraged by PWA to actually power that user experience. Despite all the work on this, we're still in a situation, though, where the web is constantly compared to native. And these comparisons have really increased dramatically recently when PWA became more mainstream. When PWA became more mainstream, we heard PWA versus native all the time. Do a Google search about PWA, you'll see something about native. So the benefits of native were performance, they were APIs, and it was discoverability as well. And for performance, I think there's a lot of speakers here today that could talk to you about performance, so I'm not going to mention what the web can do to address that. But APIs, we have tried to address that with PWA. That's kind of what PWA is. It's a toolbox of APIs that you can use to address your user experience. And you could argue that PWA has made a pretty good job in that. But there's a third option on here called discoverability. And when I talked earlier about our PWA, I talked a lot about offline. But actually, there was one more feature which we implemented, which draws on the discoverability topic. And I say draws on because actually it's more retention-based. And it focuses on being there in front of the user's face, not you finding new content, but actually bringing your users back to you. Add to home screen. We noticed that it worked because we had returned twice in the first 2 weeks. So if I came and I used add to home screen, I returned twice within the first 2 weeks. And of those users, they converted 97% better. That's already like, come on, amazing. Other businesses have had higher results as this. They've had lower results than this. So it always usually depends on what kind of product you have, what kind of business you're running. But I would say for a large part, it's pretty much worth implementing it. It's also very simple to do. It recognizes that in a mobile landscape, sites are hidden behind the web browser. How do you find new websites? I would say that for the majority of us, we have some ideas of which websites we use, and we use the same ones. Finding new websites, even through a browser, is quite difficult. Native, on the other hand, they have this totally nailed, and they have a store. Yeah. So in this store, developers and businesses, they get the leverage of users being able to find them way more easily. They have filtering, they have categories, they have all of this stuff that lets you, when you think, I need a banking app, or I need a way to do some calculations, or whatever you're using in the store, you have a way that you can go in and be like, bam, found a music app. Bam, I found something else. Bam, I found a way I can book some food. So it made me think, well, how can the web compete on this? Like, we don't have a store. Like, the obvious solution is, well, why doesn't the web have a store? And the answer to that is, well, you have a problem in that the web is open. That's one of the major benefits of web. That's why we're always like, the web is open, let's do it. Everything's great. But you need a gatekeeper. In this case, we have Google as a gatekeeper. In iOS, we have Apple as a gatekeeper. And that gatekeeper is very important because it makes sure that the quality of those apps is high. It also makes sure that there's no viruses, they can see everything there, right? So having that gatekeeper is ultimately important, but that would mean a web store would need a gatekeeper as well. And by having that, you defeat the whole purpose of the open web. So what about this? It's in German, so trivago is a German company, hence the German. This is the Microsoft Store, and very recently they implemented PWAs into their store. That means that PWAs are on the same playing field as native apps. So they treat it as a normal member. Now, the way they do this is you have to set up a package, basically. And you then submit that package, but you then also gain access to a lot of the APIs on Windows, on the operating system, what was previously called Universal Windows Platform. And so as a website, that means you can then access Windows APIs. So it becomes a platform, basically. The website is a platform which can then utilize an OS-level API. In this case, we have trivago in a store, which would mean that you can go to that store and then find trivago. If you typed in hotels, you'd be like, hotel, trivago. If you want to find flights, you could go in and find a website that looks for flights. And it could be a website, not a native app. But this kind of setup doesn't really work for everyone, because this setup assumes that Microsoft has an operating system. But there are other browsers in the world that don't have operating systems, at least Firefox OS, yes. Opera, to my knowledge, does not have an operating system. So this wouldn't really work for them, right? They can't make their website, they can't make their store accept websites on the assumption that it's a platform and then utilize the operating system's APIs. But they could create a web store individually. Think about Opera extensions or Firefox extensions. What about if your browser actually had websites that you could find, categorize, filter, etc.? You can discover new content. You can discover new things. Expand your horizons. Opera is already kind of trying to do something like this. They recognize that visibility and discoverability isn't so great on web. And actually, they give you this suggestions thing. So based on my previous history of where I'm going, they realize that I like PWA things. They realize that I apparently like photos at Google and booking food and trivago. That one seems like, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's in my bookmarks. I don't know why they would suggest it. Maybe it's not, who knows. Well, so they already do this through the speed dial. Chrome, Safari, they could take the same route as Microsoft did if they wanted and accept PWAs into their store, or they could take the Opera solution, Firefox solution, hypothetical solutions, or they could come up with their own idea. But I've talked now about how accepting PWAs into a store or having its own store could be a good thing. But what does the actual web gain from any of this? Well, the web gains an advantage of having an already provable medium of visibility for users to explore new ways to find better user experiences. So that's what the web gains. It gains another medium of exploration. Now, right now, how do you find new websites? Well, you have to know the direct link, trivago.com, or you find them through a search engine, google.com, then go to trivago. But there's really no visible way. If you search through a search engine, you're going to see a big list of links, and you might click through some of those websites. And that's how you find it. But what if the web had its store? I want to find a place for hotels, hotels category, bam, there we go. Developers and businesses, well, they gain marketing and they gain more users. They gain another medium, and they, naturally, through that discoverability, they gain those more users. And that more users, generally speaking, leads to more conversions if you have a good user experience. Users gain a already comfortable method of exploring new apps. So real question, is there anyone here that doesn't know how to use a native store? Okay, nobody. All right, there we go. Point proven, I hope. So by doing this, and if you add to the fact that you make user experience a ranking factor in this hypothetical store, and a website has to better their user experience to get featured in the store, for example. By getting featured in the store, that makes you go, whoa, this guy got featured. How did he do it? Well, he made his user experience better. Really? We need to do that. Tell everyone. So sites already kind of do this. So awards.com, they take user experience into factor when they're showcasing a website. Well, a store could do that as well. So I'm going to recap a little bit here. PWA. You should develop a PWA for your business because it will lead to user experience if you do it in the right way. So as I mentioned, the building blocks, make sure that you don't put a pile of bricks in a hole, and you actually design that user experience in a great way. And then you personalize it. Because both of them then could lead to visibility. That will lead to visibility for you. That should lead to more conversions. So the PWA, user experience, visibility, bam, more users, more retention, more conversions. And that is it from me. Thank you.